In this section, we're going to cover creating and programming user interface functions in Unreal Motion Graphics. Video 1. Laying out an RTS-Style UI using UMG. In this video, we're going to create horizontal and vertical boxes to help lay out our UI. Then we're going to add some buttons to allow the user to select and deselect their units. And finally, we're going to add some text to display the total number of selected units. So what we need to do is work inside of the Game UI Unreal Motion Graphics file that we created in a previous video. So this is our UMG_game UI, which is in our content top-down BP blueprints folder. So with this open, in a previous video we added a horizontal box and image inside of an overlay to create the basic layout for our user interface. Now I want to add a couple buttons over to the left side here, one for selecting all of our units, one for deselecting all of our units, and then also have some text to indicate how many units we currently have selected. So the first thing we need to do is this horizontal box. We need to actually wrap this in another horizontal box, because what we're wanting to do is have basically three different things along the bottom of our screen. We want to have the two buttons I talked about, some text, and leave this control in near the middle. So if we right click on this horizontal box, we can actually go to the wrap with menu, and this allows us to basically insert a widget control inside of our hierarchy. So we're going to wrap this with another horizontal box. Now we have another horizontal box here. We actually want this to be the width and the height of the overlay that it's within. But we want this horizontal box to actually be in the middle and fill. So what this allows us to do is fill basically has whatever component you are telling the slot to fill. It will try to fill an entire area as far as spacing. So right now it knows to fill this space, it needs to kind of be in the middle because we have it aligned to the middle as well. So that leaves this control back to essentially where we started it with, but having this horizontal box in here now is going to allow us to add the other pieces of our UI that we want to add. The next thing we need is a vertical box. So we're actually going to find the vertical box in our palette. So if we actually just search for box, there's several different boxes, but we want a vertical box down here inside of our panel subsection. I'm going to drag this vertical box on top of the horizontal box we just added. So this actually adds it all the way to the right. We want this to actually be all the way to the left. So we can click this little arrow box to make it jump to the left, and that actually moved it up our list. So whenever these horizontal boxes come down, they're actually organized left to right as you go down the list. So inside of this horizontal box, we need to add a couple buttons. If we X out of our search, the button is actually right at the top. So let's go ahead and drag two buttons inside of this vertical box. And then inside of these buttons, we're going to need some text to say what these buttons are. So I'm going to grab one text and put it on the first button, and another piece of text on the second button. So we have two buttons here. We can actually zoom in and look at this. And by default, any text that you pull in just says text block. So let's go ahead and change that first. So this first text block, we're going to actually have this say select all. Let's go ahead and make sure that text is centered. And the next text block, this is actually going to say deselect all. So what these buttons are going to allow us to do are select and deselect all of the units that are within our map. So the second button, if we highlight it, we don't really want it nestled right next to the first button. So what I'm actually going to do is tell it to fill, but also be down at the bottom for its vertical alignment. So what this does is basically moves these buttons to be at opposite ends of this vertical box. The other thing you'll notice is the vertical box is actually right up against the edge of our background, which doesn't look that great. So let's go ahead and highlight vertical box, which we can highlight by mousing over the edge or just clicking on it in the hierarchy. So what we can do is actually add some padding. So let's actually click here and add a 10 padding. So what this does is adds 10 padding to the top, bottom, left, and right. So this makes it slightly smaller so we have a nice border around the edge. Now the last thing we want to do for these buttons is we actually want to name these. We don't want these to be button because in the next video we're going to start programming these buttons, and if we left it as a name of, say, button 0 is what it's called now, then we would have a button 0 clicked event, which would be very difficult to determine, well, what is button 0? Well, in this case it's our select all button. So let's rename this as select all underscore button. So this means that the button is named now, and whenever we go to add an event to it, such as our clicked event, which we'll be adding later, then we'll have a very clear indication of what button that event goes with. So let's also rename our deselect all button as deselect all underscore button. Now the very last thing we want to do is, you'll see that these buttons are not quite the same size, at least they don't appear to be, because of how this text is not as wide as this. So let's actually add a little bit of padding around our text for the top and bottom. Right now they're set at 4, 2, 4, and 2 for left, top, right, and bottom. So let's actually add a little bit more to the top and bottom, and let's go ahead and make those 4 as well. This is a very subtle thing, but it lets us have the buttons be actually the same size. So we're going to select this text and have this text be the same as well. So now that our buttons are the same size and have a nice kind of border around the text as well, that'll actually finish it up for what we want to do with setting up these buttons. So for ease of adding in the next thing, let's go to this vertical box, which is housing our buttons, and go ahead and collapse that. I'll go ahead and collapse this horizontal box too, which that horizontal box is the box that is housing our attack button. So the next thing I want to do is add actually a horizontal box, because we're going to need to add 2 pieces of text that says how many units we have selected and a number to go along with it. So let us go search for box again in our palette, and we'll find a horizontal box. Let's drag that on top of this horizontal box. Now whenever you drag something on, it always jumps to the end of the line, so we actually want this to be a little further up, and the easiest way to do that is to go ahead and use the arrows to change the order. Now there's nothing in this horizontal box right now, that's why it's so thin. So let's go ahead and add 2 text blocks to it. So there's one text here and another text. Okay, so these text blocks, the first one, let's go ahead and name this as units selected, colon, and I'm actually going to put a space at the end as well, so there's a little bit of extra space here before the second text block, which this is going to, at least right now, have the number 0 in it. And I do want this centered top and bottom, so let's click on our horizontal box and tell it to be centered vertically. And it's a little close to these buttons, a little close here, so let's go ahead and actually increase the left padding for this horizontal box while we're here. I'm going to make it something nice and large, like 50, just to move it over. Now the reason I set this separately, there are 2 text blocks here, is that this part of the text box, this unit selected, won't ever change. We're always going to display that. However, this number here, we're going to actually, in a later video, bind this number to actually a variable in another class, so that we can have this dynamically change as we select and deselect units. So that's actually it for this video. Go ahead and make sure you've saved and compiled your UMG class. So we've added these 2 buttons and these text controls,